Okay, what's up everybody? Should be seeing the stream popping up here in a moment. Just waiting to see signs of life for my stream that it's working. Yep, seems like it's working okay. Can you guys see my screen? Can you hear me? Okay, so let's get going here. So welcome to Shading and Lighting 2. Well, welcome back, actually. So I know I worked with you all just a couple months ago. So this time we are building off what we did before. So we're still doing rendering. Obviously, we're still going to be talking about lights, all that fun stuff. But what we're going to do is take it a little bit farther here and then get into material properties. So you guys obviously have done a little bit with the materials from like the first part of this week's assignments. Those were all material presets. As we get kind of deeper into the class, we're still going to use presets to some extent, but I also want to get to the point where you are all comfortable making your own materials and not relying on presets. So we're going to do a combination of a couple of different things. We'll be making textures in Photoshop. Some of it we're going to have to clean up a little bit. Then it's going to be a good prep for you because I think in about, I want to say it's in about 4 or 5 months after this class, you're going to hit another class called Digital Painting 2. And for Digital Painting 2, you will be going into Substance Painter. And I don't know if you guys have had a chance to check out Painter before, but it's a really cool 3D texturing and material creation software. We're going to get you guys to install that in week 4. And then in a few months, you're just going to sort of continue off what we're talking about this month, but doing it in a different software. So lighting before in Shading and Lighting 1 or lighting and rendering. Now it's going to be lighting materials and rendering. And then in Digital Painting 2, it's lighting materials, texturing, and rendering. So it keeps building more and more. All right, let's just hop into class and see what this week looks like. And I do want to mention a couple things here because I'm always kind of tweaking the classes a little bit. We're always going back and revisiting things based on critiques and just kind of finding new ways to organize things. So since you guys have gone through one of my classes before, you may have noticed that the activities do look a little different. What I've done is before, I used to have like a giant, like an embedded Google slideshow, and you guys were all kind of clicking through the slides to see all the information for what the activity was. So after going through some critiques from different students, it sounds like what we're going to do now is try to list out the information a bit more linearly, like it's a recipe. So instead of you guys seeing instructions up top and then somewhere down here past the playlist, you'd get to like this slideshow that you would click through. Instead, the way it's set up this time is when you get to the instructions part, you really just follow it step by step, like download the files. There might be a couple of videos you need to watch. This is for 1.1, but there's some videos you have to watch. Video playlist, so you just kind of go in order. And instead of it being an embedded slideshow, what we did is we broke up the slides into individual images, and you can still go full screen, so you can still hit the little button to pop it out if you want to see the text a little bit easier. But now you see each slide in order right on the LMS instead of having to click through the slideshow. And I would actually like your guys' feedback on what you think of this setup. Do you guys actually prefer seeing it written out like this, like a recipe? Or did you guys prefer seeing it as a slideshow where it was just embedded in the LMS? So I'm just curious about that because we've been having a few meetings about that topic at work, and we're just trying to get some feedback on what students think visually is easier to follow and understand. So I like both ways personally. I don't really have any preference, but just let me know what you guys think. Is this easier than before? All right, let's back out of that. And over here, the other thing I want you to note is that you know how like 1.2 is, of course, been our live session. it's a little different. The live session now has a weighting. So now, just by going to the live session or participating in it, or viewing the recording tomorrow, you will actually get credit just for doing that. So for the live session, really the only thing I need from you guys, this is all pretty much the same. But down here, when you're done with the live session, either today or if you view the recording tomorrow, all you have to do is post a screenshot of the page of you in the live session. Just upload it down here in the feedback, and once it's uploaded, you're going to get credit for participating and viewing the content, and then you can move on to activity 1.3. So there now is a weight to watching the live session. And 1.3, of course, is still going to build off that. And 1.3 for this week is going to be the first project where you're using this environment activity, and we're going to be pretty much every week until the end of the month, we're just going to be adding more and more information to it and just going through all sorts of different material properties and different techniques where we can build this scene. Let me try refreshing the page because that slide's not loading. Sorry, just 1 second. There we go. Yeah, so we're going to open the files up, construct a few different materials for like the doors. Just going to be a wood material, some different things with metal hinges, a few materials for the telescope, and you guys are going to have some artistic freedom on how you want to tackle these guys. But at the end of the day, you're really just producing a final render and turning that into the LMS. So your biofile, your render, and then the textures that you're using on the materials for the wood for the telescope and the wood on the windows and doors, just so I can see what textures you're using in the final image. And I do want to show you also what this looks like. All right, so here's this week. And we've got, this is actually kind of what you guys are going to be going through this month. We've got week 1, that's week 2. Week 3, there's a few different ones you're going to do, or some different ideas you can do. And let's bring up week 4. So for the first one, what we're going to do is just set up our materials for a few objects just to get you warmed up to it. Week 2, you're going to be going into Photoshop, and we're going to have you guys build a few of these textures yourself. We're going to make some tileable textures. We're going to do normal maps, get these guys connected to the materials back inside of Maya. And then over here for this one, we're going to be adding a few extra lights. Just kind of, again, expanding on what we had here, talking about glass, transmissions, how you allow light to pass through different things. And with this one, you're going to be able to design, since you've done lighting, you're going to be able to design and create some of your own light setups, opening, closing doors, picking different colors, just ways to accent your scene. And then in the last week, there's just a couple random objects we haven't got to, like the vases, the candles. We're going to talk about subsurface scattering, transmissions, like light passing into an object and scattering internally. Candle wax is a pretty good example of that, but even character's skin is kind of using the same principle where there's a scatter inside of the surface. And just like the previous one, depending on your light setup, you're going to have different results getting out of week 4. So that's kind of what your month looks like, just a building block from one to the other all the way to the end. And every time you kind of turn one of these in, I'm going to be leaving a critique. I'll tell you guys maybe some suggestions on things I'd maybe change or adjust. You'll have time to go back and make a few tweaks as you start progressing through it. So hopefully by the end, you have a really nice, fully lit, colored, and textured render that you're going to feel pretty proud of. And of course, these are all things you're going to be using later on in your other classes as well. All right. Cool. Well, let's just dive in here and do a couple of these things. So for this activity for 1.3, I've got the zip file right there. I have my example render if you just want to see what yours could look like. So what I'm going to do is download this thing real quick. And Let's get rid of this guy. I think I already have it on my desktop. We're just going to extract that, and I'll show you what this project looks like when you first open it up. And if you guys have questions, by the way, as I'm going through it, let me know. I'll try to address things as they come up. Okay, so I've got Maya open. I'm using Maya 2019.2. I think most of you guys are probably using 2019. I know a couple of you may have already jumped into 2020. It doesn't matter. Both versions of Maya are totally fine. Okay, so just like we did before back in Shading and Lighting 1, what do we have to do? First thing we need to do is, of course, set the project and then open the Maya file. So with Maya open, we want to go to File, Set Project, click on that. I'm going to find my project. Now, for me, I have it on the desktop right now, but I'm only doing this for the lecture. Hopefully, you guys aren't actually keeping a lot of stuff on your desktop. I know most of you have been pretty good about having folders set up on like your Documents folder, or you have stuff stored on like on a secondary drive. Because I think on your laptops, and you guys can maybe just correct me if I'm wrong, but for your Alienware laptops, don't you guys have like a partition or like a second hard drive? Like it's not just a C drive. I think you have like a D as well, right? I have a slightly older version of the Alienware laptop, and I think you guys have a has one that might have 2 hard drives. If you do have 2 hard drives, I am extremely jealous. But what I'm going to do is set it, hit set. Oh, picked the wrong folder. That was my bad. That's right, I forgot there's a project in a folder. There we go. Set. We're going to go to Scenes. Open up the one Maya file, and we're not going to save any of that. Well, that must be nice. Because I think you guys have about like a terabyte total between the 2 drives. Because you know how much space like all this stuff takes up so quickly with like the Maya software and ZBrush and all the projects you guys are building. My poor hard drive is struggling. I think I only have about 500 gigs total, and it feels like every month I have to go through and start wiping stuff out because I'm constantly running out of space. All right, so here's what the file looks like. Relatively straightforward. Now we do have this thing in the back here. You guys might remember this from before, but if you see the black, how do you fix it? In the viewport, up in shading, just make sure you turn on backface culling, and that will allow you to see through the back side of that object into the room, if that bothers you. It's not going to affect the render because you can't see that anyway, but just wanted to point that out. All you got to do is turn on backface culling, and that might disable every time you close out of the file. It seems to be doing that quite a bit for people, so you can just turn it on if you need to fix that again. So if I go to the render cam, so panels, perspective, render cam, this is what we're currently seeing, and it's locked. You don't have to move the camera. It's already in a pretty good spot. And what I'm going to do is I want you to notice that this texture is currently loaded in on the Pixar Dome light. Now, I really want you guys to do me a favor. When you load into the scene, look at the dome light and verify that this is loading the texture. Go to the attribute editor and then look at this path right here and just make sure it is sourcing your texture properly, because for some reason over like the last month, I don't know if it's like I did something to the file, but we had a lot of people where this particular image on the dome light was just never loading. And so this whole thing was turning to white because it couldn't find the texture file. So just in case you guys notice that, if you get in here and this isn't loading and you just see solid white, what I want you to do is on the color map, so again, click on your light, go to the attribute editor, right here, hit the folder, and I want you to go to wherever your project is. So we'll come down here to Environment Look Dev, go to Source Images, and you're going to load in that guy right there, Cloud Layers. So just do that, and then you should notice it appears. So when you render it, let's turn this on. Here we go. It looks like this. This is our starting point. So it's not really the most exciting thing. We have like a little nice white accent light coming from above, a really dark kind of faint blue from the sky around us, but nothing too crazy. Now, a couple things since you are rendering again, and I'm pretty sure that most of you guys did do this, and hopefully you saw the videos back in Activity 1.1, but just double check in your viewport. Make sure that this button here, 3 from the right, that you have this set to a 50% render resolution, just to make sure this thing renders pretty quick. You probably have done this before, because I mentioned this back in the last class, but make sure that's set to 50%. And then the other big thing, which most of you have probably done, but I just want to double check about it, is in the Maya preferences on the left side, go down to render ban and make sure that that render threads thing is set to -6. I kind of mentioned this to you guys before, and I have a video in some of the activities where I keep referring to this, but again, because the month's early and this project's going to get pretty complicated the deeper we get into it. There's a lot of things going on for this to look right. And so since these materials do take a while to render, especially when you start throwing in like glass and candles and emissive materials and textures and all these normal maps and things that we've never done before, the render time can get kind of high. And if this is still set to -2, because -2 is the default, if that is set to -2, you are going to notice that as soon as you start a render, every time this is turned on, your laptop is going to come to a screeching halt. The fans are going to turn on. It's going to sound like your laptop's about to launch into space. It's going to get very hot. It's just going to be working overtime to try to render everything. And you setting that to -6 is going to make your work and life inside of Maya so much better and more manageable. So double check that before you get too deep into the activity. Once you set it, it's set forever. You don't have to do this per file. It's just something you change once, and then pretty much every other time you use Maya after that, it should be good to go. Okay. So we're going to run through a couple things with 1.3. So we're going to come down here. We'll skip past some of the videos, and what I want to do first is just let me run through some of the material basics with you guys, and then we'll probably do a couple of these guys, these materials that you do over the weekend for 1.3. So what I'm going to do is actually make a new camera, because sometimes when you're rendering this project, you might want to use a different camera that's zoomed in on something. So occasionally what I like to do is go in here and make another camera. We're going to name this test cam. And I'm going to look through my test cam. And we're just going to back it up, Alt left, we're going to move around. And I'm just going to turn on the resolution gate. I think what I'm going to do is get kind of close to these guys. And I might use this later when we're talking about glass anyway in week 3. But we're going to set that up right there. And I'm going to hit the little padlock at the top just to lock this guy down. So I'm going to do a bunch of the renders through this one today, just so we're really close to a couple of these objects. That'll give us a good chance to talk about some of the different material properties and how the Pixar surface material works. Okay, so let's run through what you guys did a little bit in 1.1, super quick. Now, what you did in 1.1 is you were doing material presets. So how do we access the presets? On the render bin shelf, you have the button right here for the preset browser. It's going to pop up here. Sometimes it'll pop up on the right side of Maya, kind of where the channel box is, but this thing's going to open up, and then on the left side we have all these different presets we can pick from. If you go to the materials, you're basically going to get a list of everything. You can search, you can type something in like plastic, you'll get plastic materials. You do metals will kind of filter out. We'll get rid of that. Let's go to let's do a plastic first, actually. Those are pretty simple. So we're going to come down to glossy plastics. I'm going to click on the bottle, and we're going to run through a couple of ways that we can do material signing, because this gets a little complicated sometimes. So by clicking on it, what you guys noticed is that in the preset browser, there were a couple ways you could bring in a material. You could either right-click and do import and assign to selected, or you could do import. And both work, by the way. They do slightly different things, but both of these will eventually get you the same result. the one key thing you have to remember is that everything in the preset browser is not really in your Maya file. These are things in RenderMan in its own folder, but these are not in your scene. So for these to show up in your render, you do have to import them. These are not currently in here. So I'm going to right click, and let's do the one that most of you probably did in 1.1. So I have this selected, and I'm going to say import and assign to selected. And by the way, you can have multiple pieces selected at once. So if you decided you wanted this to be on a bunch of objects, you could do that. Like I could do, we'll grab these two. I'm holding shift and just clicking on the second object. So holding shift is going to give me a selection of both. I'm going to right click on the green one, and I'm going to do import and assign to selected. Okay. So now that is on there. So we've got that thing assigned. So yeah, you seeing the material, it should, yeah, you are still going to have to render to see it. Now in the attribute editor, this guy right here is, I think this is what you're referring to. I know I had you guys turn this thing off before in the Hypershade. You guys all remember going through that thing where I was like, turn the swatches off, put this to list mode, and I was, because a lot of you had that crashing issue. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to. It's something we talked about in Shading and Lighting 1, but the little icon right here really isn't too important. This is in the attribute editor. I would prefer if you guys didn't click on that or even try to see this thing, because it could cause mine to crash for you. Mine will work because like I don't have the same crashing issue, and I really wish I did, because I would love to troubleshoot this. But it seems like it's affecting the students' laptops. All the instructors don't have this problem. But that will not show up. However, even if you guys did see this, to be quite honest, like it's not going to be very reliable. And generally what you get with this little icon is going to be such a kind of poor representation of what the material would look like in the render anyway. At that point, I don't even use it. So I think as long as your render is pretty efficient and you have it set to like really low settings like this, the render process of seeing the material shouldn't be too devastating where it's going to slow you down. So for example, like if I turn it on right now, we're just going to let this thing start. And you can see it's rendering. Now because I have it set to 50%, like it's chewing through it pretty quick. There's a couple of things we could do to make this a little bit easier to see. One, when I click on things, you'll notice that it selects the object, which is cool because I do want to select things, but it's really hard to see what the material looks like and get to the material's properties and also see the selection highlighting. So that's kind of annoying. If you guys want to disable selection highlighting, you can do that. Up here under show in the viewport, way at the bottom, you can say do not show selection highlighting. And now when I click on things, see how it doesn't show me the little like wireframe that keeps lighting up? I can click on objects in the render, I don't get the wireframe, and I can still very easily get to the material. So now I have a really clear view of exactly what this material looks like. And if I start adjusting this thing, it will update. So if I decide I want to make this brighter, you can see immediately it tries to change right in the render. Okay. Now there's a few other things you can do to make this a little bit quicker. So again, because this is updating and it's our primary way to see this, I don't want to render the entire viewport because all this is wasted when maybe the only thing I care about are just these two objects. So at the top, if I click on this guy right here to the right of the render resolution, this one called crop, if you click and then marquee drag over what you want, and if you click off, it'll get rid of it. But see how when I drag the marquee, how the render tries to update within it? Now the one thing about the crop tool that we used a little bit in Shading and Lighting 1 is when you turn it on, it's constantly wanting to redraw the crop, and so it makes it very difficult to click on anything. So once you draw your crop down and you've got the region of the image that you want to render, don't forget to then turn the crop button off. That way you're back to selecting things, and you'll notice the crop region is still there, but now I can click on things and change settings, and I'm not worried about this thing constantly redrawing the crop. so that you can turn that thing on and off as you need to set it. And if you want to get rid of it completely, just turn it on, just single click, and that will get rid of it altogether. But let's just draw that back and then turn the button off so I can go back to selecting my objects. Okay, now there's really two main concepts that I want you guys to think about for the first 2 weeks of the class. We want to talk about what makes up a lot of these materials right here from the presets. So this plastic, for example, you'll notice is a diffuse with a color, and so I'm sure you guys can see clearly this color is what is the color showing up on the surface. And then below that, we have something called primary specular, and there's some various, little attributes and colors in here, black and white. There's a roughness value. That's also doing something. So the key for the first couple weeks is understanding the difference between diffuse and specular reflections. So both of these are considered a reflection effect on the material. And there are a bunch of other lobes in here that do different things. These are also reflections, the clear coat and the rough specular. Same thing with iridescence. But we also have like subsurface scattering for like skin and candle wax where light scatters internally. I've got glass settings down here. Glow, we'll talk about that later in week 4. So there's a lot of other areas that still make up the material, but every preset you guys were using from the preset browser, they were all still the Pixar surface material. They were just different variations of that material's settings. So let's kind of focus first on the diffuse. Oh, actually, you know what? Let me hop back to the preset browser real quick because I did want to show you the other way to bring materials in. You know how before I was doing the import and assign to selected? I'm going to do this a little different. Let's just click on, we'll do this guy next, the other glass bottle. We're going to click on that, and I'm going to do, we'll do the pink plastic. Okay, I'm just going to right click, and I'm going to choose import. Now I do have it selected, but I'm just going to pick import, and when I do that, let's draw the crop down again. We'll just render these two for now, I guess. You'll notice that nothing happened, right? So if I import it and not import and assign to selected, it did bring it in the scene, but because it wasn't selected, it was selected, sorry, but we didn't choose the right option, we're not seeing it on the surface. So how do we find a material that we imported that is not showing up on a piece of geometry? That is where the Hypershade comes in. This guy, our old friend. Now, the Hypershade, I'm going to be honest with you guys, this is not the easiest thing to wrap your head around when you're still new to Maya. It is a very complicated looking window. And when you guys get in here, there are going to be probably bunches of other, a bunch of other things still visible. You guys might still have like the material viewer up here in the corner. You might have the property editor down here in the bottom right. There could be like the creation section on the left somewhere. So when you first open the Hypershade, if you don't customize it, there are a lot of different pieces visible. I typically close out of all that crap because I don't really care about it. The only thing I have visible is our node graph, and you can't get rid of this. This is the main part of the Hypershade. And I also have the browser. The browser is right here. So just in case, if you guys ever break the Hypershade and you're trying to, repair it, like let's say I deleted the browser by mistake, and I'm like, where did it go? How do I bring it back? Just up here, go to Window, Browser, just find the thing you're looking for, and then you can just drag and release it. It'll snap back into place. But the reason the browser is important is because this is where you see the different materials that you've made. So right now, because I brought in the green plastic and the pink, you can see there's our green, there's the pink. So it's here, it's just not on anything. But it's very easy to put materials on an object once you already have it in the project. So if I click on this, so I'm selecting it, because remember I don't have selection highlighting turned on. We disabled that earlier. So I am clicking on the bottle, and then what I'm going to do is hold down my right mouse button over this material right here, that line where it says pink plastic. Hold down right mouse button, and when I'm holding it down, you can see a bunch of options pop up. Assign material to selection, select object with the material, I can refresh the swatch, I can graph the network. we're going to do assign material to selection. So because that's selected, if I hold right mouse button down and go up to this guy, you'll notice it immediately updates, and we can see it showing up here. And you can see that reflecting off the side of the other material. Because this is a plastic and it's fairly reflective, you're sort of seeing that mirror-like reflection of the bottle right next to it. Now you can also swap materials. So here's another way to do it. Let's say that you wanted to assign the same green plastic to any material that's currently using the pink. So we want to do like a material swap. There's another trick where if you hold your right mouse button down over the material and do select objects, and I do want to disable or turn this back on so you can see what's happening. If I right click and do it this way, see how it selects the objects that have that material? Just like if I right click and do select objects with this one, it'll select whatever that material is currently assigned to. That's a really powerful way to visualize, and so just so you understand what something is currently assigned to without you clicking through everything and just looking at the attribute editor. Now the nice thing about that is by doing that, if I were to right click over the pink plastic and do select, and then right click over green plastic and choose assign, I just selected that object and assigned the green to it without ever touching anything in the viewport. So let's do this again. I'm going to do it back the other way. Right click over green, select, right click over pink, assign. Right? And now we've put the pink on everything that had the green one before. That's called a material swap. And it's not on this guy too. It's not showing up because I don't have it in the crop, but that's also pink if I rendered it. Let's go back one more time. Select, assign. Okay, so that's one way to assign something if you've already got it into the scene. Now, the next thing I want to do real quick is just go over a few basic settings here with these two top sections. So we have diffuse color and primary specular. Now, diffuse color is going to be probably the most important material property you guys use for kind of anything. This is what when people think of like materials, this is typically the one they think of. This is just the color of the surface. Now, right now it's a flat color, but in a little bit here, we're going to be putting textures on this. So instead of it being just like a flat blue, we're going to do it for the doors back here. We're going to have a wood texture or image on it, and so it will actually show you a photo as the color instead of it just being flat. And you can put a texture on pretty much anything. Any one of these attributes that has that little checker button to the right, that tells you it can have something connected into it. I could make a texture for the color. I could make a texture for the face color, which is like kind of like the reflection. Clear coat parameters, anything in here could have a texture pretty much. So with the diffuse color, if I go through and change the hue, you can see it updates pretty much instantly. Very easy to make adjustments with hue, how rich it is or desaturated, the brightness, darkness of it, right? This is all pretty simple. Maybe we'll do that for now. Let's darken that down a little bit, and I want you guys to see what the face color is doing. This is a little bit different. Now with face color, it still looks like it's a color attribute, but this does a very, very different effect on the surface. So if I wanted to do let's try to do gold real quick, okay? So I'm going to try to do gold from scratch, and we're not even going to use a preset. So what I'm going to do is click on these guys, and I actually want to get that too. And then I'm going to instead make my Pixar surface up here instead of using a preset. So we're kind of done with the preset for right now. We're going to right click on this little button up here on the shelf. Oh, sorry, 1 second. I think my stream just freaked out. We're going to right click this button on the shelf, and I'm going to pick Pixar surface. Now when you pick this and you have things selected, you are importing a material, this material, and putting it on whatever is currently selected. So we're going to click, and you can see things go gray. In the, oh, not that guy, we're done with the preset browser. In the Hypershade, you're going to see there's something new here called Pixar Surface 2. This is the material that we just created by right-clicking on that button right there. So I'm going to rename it. So we can just click, and then over here in the attribute editor, we can call it whatever we want. Let's call this, we'll call it just like reflection material. Now on this material, you'll notice it starts as a pretty much just a flat neutral gray. There's not really a whole lot to it. It's very, very simple. And that's what's already assigned to everything else. These all have a just default Pixar surface material. So again, like before, I can go in there and change color, give it some saturation, and do whatever I need to do. But I'm going to try doing gold. So if I pick on this, or pick that color, and I'll go right around here. We'll boost the color up a little bit, make it richer, make it a little bit brighter. And you can kind of see that I'm getting the color of gold, but it doesn't really feel like gold. Okay, so, well, let's come down here to the next section. So we have primary specular. So I'm just going to boost up face color and just watch what that does. Now that's sort of doing something where you can see we're kind of getting the right direction. Like it's a little more shiny. That kind of makes sense because gold is fairly shiny as well. Okay, then I have a edge color. That one's a little bit harder to see, but that's probably doing something. But really what's happening right now is when I boost these up, what we've kind of done is just made a plastic that happens to have a gold color. This isn't really metallic gold. So the main thing you want to understand about primary specularity right here is this is defining how the specular reflections, which is sort of like the highlights in the surface, how they are reacting with light and how they react with the surface. So the face color is a pretty easy one to understand. This is simply going to be how intense do you want the highlights or reflections on the surface to be. If it's black, it essentially doesn't reflect anything. It's just the diffuse color. If it's a lot brighter, you get this really intense shiny reflection on the surface, which is then adding on top of the gold color behind it. It's getting kind of turning into a weird looking material where it's like a strange mix of almost like a mirror and a kind of gold plastic together. Let's kind of bring this back a little bit. And actually, let me turn down the diffuse gain all the way to black, which is going to kill the color. So we're going to get rid of that. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want you to see, like when we take the color out, it's a really good way to see what this section is doing by itself. So this is what it looks like without any color. Now the roughness right here, watch how that affects the reflection. If I go lower, what's happening to the reflection? So it's getting a lot sharper. You can see trees reflecting from behind the camera. Like in that Pixar dome light, these are just the different things that are in the image that we're using in the render. So it's very, very clear. And as I go up, you can see it's starting to diffuse and blur the reflection. So we're getting almost like a grittiness to the surface, which is scattering the reflection to giving us a drier effect. And if you keep going, it gets more and more diffused. Blurrier and blurrier and blurrier. And eventually it gets to the point where you've just blurred this reflection so much that it doesn't even look like it's really that shiny anymore. It kind of looks like what was going on up here when I had the gray color. It's just a very dry reflection. So roughness is exactly what it sounds like. You are defining the roughness of the surface. Is it smooth and polished, or is it very gritty and bumpy? And that has a big effect on how it reacts with the light around that object, and how it also reflects the objects also surrounding this object. So very important. Roughness is super critical. We'll keep it somewhere right around here for right now. Now, if I wanted to do an actual gold metal, we do need to approach this a little bit differently. So gold metal is kind of interesting. It's not really just you picking a gold color and then making it shiny, because this is still that same issue we had before where it feels like it's a gold plastic. Gold and other types of metals, the color is actually down here. So watch what happens when I change this to that color right there. We're going to make the face color the same one we were using before. See how that already looks way different? I'm going to make the edge color the same as well. Now I can make them brighter, so it's a little bit easier to see it. But this looks like a metal. Before it didn't, but now just by putting the color in the color of the gold or the metal into here, it looks like it's actually metallic. So that's kind of the key with metal. Its color is coming from here as opposed to up there. But you can still do the same thing with roughness. You can make it like be super clean gold. I could make it be very dry, matte gold, like gold ore that was just mined out of the earth, something like that. And once you kind of get the metal set up, it's also pretty easy just to change this and get different results. So like if I change the face color to, I don't know, we'll do like over here, a little bit warmer, you can see we're starting to get almost into like a copper. Oh, there's my cat. You can probably hear the cat in the background. So now we're starting to get more towards orange, and it's probably a little too bright for copper, and I might desaturate it a little bit, but we are kind of like getting really close to having a copper type of metal just simply by changing the hue of that color. Okay, so let's just kill all this stuff. We're going to put everything to black, and we're going to turn off the R to stop the render. All right, let's go back to the render cam. Okay, we're going to focus on getting a couple textures and materials assigned to a few of these objects and do part of what you guys are doing for 1.3. I think last time I did this, I did the doors. I might change it up this time. I think I'm going to focus more on the telescope. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to do this. I'm going to let you guys figure out the telescope. Let's do this guy. All right. So to do this, you can see that what we want to do is select all the door, window, shutter frame, geometry, all the stuff you're seeing right here. There are other windows behind the camera that we don't need to select. If you want to assign materials to them, you can. We're going to make the preset browser. We're going to find this preset right here. We're going to assign it to the objects. And we are going to then connect a texture into them. And then see if we can get this wood to show up on the surface. Now, potentially, depending on what texture you guys pick, you might have to clean up a few things in Photoshop. And then the texture that you end up using or modifying in Photoshop, you will be turning this in with the project, because I do want to see what your image looks like, just so it gives me a better idea like where you started and then how that looks in the final render. And we're going to make sure we're putting it in the project as well. All right, so Colonial Maple 223. It's going to be easy. I'm going to go to my perspective view. And the first trick here is let's just get some of the objects selected so I can even try assigning the material to it. So the pieces we're looking for are going to be pretty much all of these. Oh, let me turn on my selection highlighting again. There we go. All of these guys. So this, that one, holding shift, let's click on that. Inside, we've got this and that. Okay, I'm going to stop with those for right now. So I have a bunch of the pieces selected, and we don't want to click on any of this. These are groups, or not groups, but those are eventually going to be metal, so we're not going to worry about that. So just clicking on these pieces right here, and we're going to go into the preset browser, and let's find Colonial Maple. So under wood, Colonial Maple is right there, Colonial Maple 223. I'm going to right click, and we're going to do import and assign to selected. So it is going to put it on those objects. Okay. It's on there. So let's just try it out. If I'm through the render camera, what do we get? It shouldn't be gray anymore. Let's find out. Yep, it works. Now we're getting like a brown color. Now if I click on the material and look at the settings, so I'm clicking on the object and we're just kind of going through the settings in the attribute editor until I find the material. You can see, okay, Colonial Maple has a brown color. There's some different values under primary specular reflections, but for the most part, it really is just a slightly reflective brown color. There's nothing really about the Colonial Maple that looks like wood. It's just shiny brown, like this could almost pass for like just a plastic at this point. So we still have to make the wood texture and then assign it to the material. But one of the bigger issues I'm noticing is that even though we did make the material, I didn't put it on these guys. Now I'm going to show you an issue. Let's say that when you're doing this, you do it exactly like what we did here, but then you decide over here, like, oh, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to click on all these guys. We're going to click on that, where I have everything selected. And over here, I'm going to do the exact same thing we did before. Oops, where is it? And we are going to bring in another Colonial Maple. We're going to do it one more time. Right click, import and assign as selected. Now it is on there, and you can see that there it is. If I render it, we'll hopefully see it. Yep, see I can even do it in perspective view. Like, it's working. But the really important thing about this is that because we did that in 2 different steps, look at the Hypershade. Colonial Maple 223. Colonial Maple 224. This means that technically, because you've imported the material twice, because we did it in 2 different stages, it now has 2 different materials for those objects. Now, this isn't really a big deal, but it means if you ever had an art director or someone say, hey, I like what we're doing here for the wood, I just wish it was a little shinier. Because you have multiple materials now, you're now going through different materials and doing the same adjustment over and over and over. And for what you guys probably want is, if you decide that you want this one Colonial Maple material on multiple objects, we don't want to have that broken up between the 2 materials. I want to get just one material on everything. So what I'm going to do is that trick I showed you guys earlier, and we're going to do a texture or material swap to get this on everything. So if I right click on Colonial Maple 223, select objects, see how it shows you what it's assigned to. Okay, let's do it again for the other one. So what do I have to do? I have to right click on one of the materials. It doesn't really matter which one because they're the same thing. Select objects. And then I'm going to right click on the other material and choose assign material to selection. So what I just did is the ones that were using Colonial Maple 224 have now been assigned Colonial Maple 223. In fact, if I right click over 224 and select those objects again, nothing lights up. This isn't assigned to anything. If I right click on this one and do select, now it's on everything. So we now have one material on all the objects. This guy's pretty much not doing anything. In fact, what I'm also going to do is swap these guys back to the default. So if you guys ever also put the wrong material and you want to put it back to default, that gray color, like I don't want to have that plastic on these anymore, I can select those guys, right click over the default Pixar surface, which just came with the project, and do assign material to selection. And now this one is not on anything. So occasionally when you do that, when you start cleaning up your scene and like consolidating materials, removing things that you don't need anymore, you will end up making materials that you don't end up using for your final render. Up here at the top, if you do edit, delete unused nodes, it will remove the materials that you're not currently using. So because those weren't assigned to anything, they're just gone. Now the only thing about this, and I use this quite a bit, is sometimes you will make a material that's not assigned to anything, but you want to save for later. That will delete it. So just be kind of cautious about it. This is going to delete any material and texture that is not actively assigned to something in the 3D scene. But for what we're doing, I did want to clean that up. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now let's just very quickly do the hinges and bolts, and I'm going to come back to this guy, and we're going to do the texture. So we're going to skip back. We're going to come down here for just a moment, then we're going to hop back up to this one to do the texture. So I do want to show you the trick with the hinges and bolts, because if you don't sort of see this part and how to do it, this is going to be a very frustrating part of the activity. So it says we need to select all the hinge and bolt geometry, and you can kind of see it in the little screenshot. We're going to select all that stuff, and once it's selected, we are going to assign a black oxidized steel preset to those objects. And again, we want to try to do it with one material, not having this assigned as 20 different materials to each individual piece. Okay, how do we do it? Here is what I don't want you guys to do, because this is still important to know what not to do. I do not want to see you guys clicking through each object one at a time, doing this. All right, that's just one thing. There's 4 just for the door on the outside. Then there's all of them on the inside, and we also got like latches and little hooks. Over here, there's more of them, like all these pieces that make up the window. So it could take like a half hour just to select everything properly. So the trick is, if you read what this is telling you, it actually tells you what you need to do. As a tip, if you can, while you could do this manually, you could use the display layer. And you'll see down here, there's a little screenshot where it says select objects, hinges, bolts layer. Okay, let's get out of that. What I did for you guys to make this a bit easier for you, and to show you how cool these display layers are, I'm sure you guys remember these from before in Shading and Lighting 1, how you put those like character backgrounds on it, where you can just like assign an object or a light to it and then turn the visibility on and off. Well, it's the same thing, but we're doing it with multiple objects at once. So the hinges and bolts layer, if you turn the visibility on and off, you can see this is everything I'm trying to have you select. So because I already took the time to put it on a layer, I'm doing that because if you now simply right click on the hinges bolts layer and choose select objects, it will automatically select every single object you put on the layer for you with one click of the button. That is a massive time saver. And I know this probably seems like such a simple thing, but this is really one of the main reasons why I use display layers. I don't use display layers just to like hide and show things. I use display layers to sort of organize and group like objects together. So if I ever need to select a bunch of things at once, if I've taken the time just to put them on a layer just one time, I can always go back here and do select, and it will immediately bring up that selection with just the click of a button. So it's really pretty cool. So just do that, do select. Once you have all these guys selected through this display layer, then it's the easy part. We just have to find that black oxidized steel and then assign it. Okay, so we're going to go back into the preset browser, which is right here. We're going to do a search for black oxidized steel. It's under metal. If you also want to do a search, if you go click on the materials one at the top, so this, if you have this selected, this will show you all the materials. And from there, if you start typing it in, black, there it is right there, black oxidized steel, I can then right click, import and assign to selected, which is all those pieces like that. And we can close out. I think I'm done with the preset browser for now. And now if I render it, you should notice that they have that metal. Yep, there they go. So it's not the most like reflective metal. It's pretty dark and matte looking, but it's on there because you can tell it's not that same gray color anymore. And if we go over here to the other window, you'll see it's the same thing. So that black oxidized steel is now on all the objects without too much work. So make sure you guys do it that way. I would hate to see you manually clicking through the objects to do it the other way, because it'll take you way, way too long to get all that assigned. All right. You guys have any questions about that? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. I'm going to hop back up to this part right here. And the last thing we're going to do real quick, because I know we're getting kind of near the end of the lecture, is I want to show you how to find a texture and then connect it to the material. So this is one of the big key things for this particular activity, because all we've really done from the last assignment and this one so far is really just putting presets on everything, which is cool, but how do you customize the preset? How do you change it? How do you make it something unique? Presets are not meant to be left as presets because we all know what a preset looks like. And there's going to be plenty, once you get used to looking at this stuff and you know, start using the softwares a little bit more, you'll start picking up when people use presets because you've seen it before. And it's never something you want to do. You always want to try to at least modify it a little bit. Yes. So, yeah, Chantel, you had the question about when you assign it to a layer, did I have to select each piece manually? And unfortunately, yes. So it is a pain when you first set up the layer. So that part was not fun. I just did the hard work for you. But I did have to go through pretty much manually click on everything. I think I was able to get away with some of it by going through groups, because I think some of these are grouped together to some extent, like window hinge group. Like that guy right there was most of the pieces. So I think I may have done like this, and hit up. Yeah, that's what I was doing. I was like clicking on those and hitting up, and then hitting that button to make a new layer with the selected object. And then I started going through and doing that over and over again. Once the layer was there, I would like click, shift click, up, right click on the layer, assign the objects to it. I just kept going around and doing it over and over again. You know, click, click, hit up to go to the group, assign it to the layer. And eventually I had a layer that had everything, but it still took me about 5 minutes to get all that stuff assigned properly. But the payoff at the end of having it, you know, easy to select a layer, I think is still well worth it. But that's how I did it. All right. So let's find our texture. Right above this, okay, so wooden windows and doors, follow the image below. These websites can assist you with finding textures. We have a bunch of them. And I'm just going to use Pexels. This one's got some pretty clean stuff. But feel free to play with these other guys, see if you find anything you like. You can also use Google, honestly. There's nothing wrong with that. This one's pretty good, though, because all the stuff on Pexels are free. They're typically really good detail and resolution, which is fantastic. I use a lot of these for my different slides, so you'll probably see some of these images are in random slides and documents that the instructors use because, again, they're free and they still look pretty good. All right, so let's type in wood. Now, when I type in wood, you can see that we do get some pretty good stuff, and really the trick is when you're doing a search for this, you want to be careful what type of wood image you're picking because some of these should not be assigned to the door or really any of these wooden objects in the scene. For example, like this is a bad decision. You're seeing the side of like individual logs and and pieces of a tree. It's a wood pile. That's not this image. If you put it on the door, will literally look like this on the door. You're going to see the side profile of all those different pieces lining up. It's going to look really, really weird. Now you also want to be careful too, because if you pick something that has like this type of information on it, like this, again, it probably looks cool, but putting that in the door is probably not going to work very well because it's going to look like the door has these rainbow stripes of different pieces of like boards and colors. And unless like I set up the material and there's this thing called UVs that we haven't talked about very much yet. But if I have the UV set up perfectly, this might look okay, but this is really risky if you have not set up the UVs yourself. And you guys don't know about that yet. That's something we'll talk about next week. What you're looking for is you're trying to find a texture that is as flat and simple as possible. Try to avoid lines and seams between boards, crazy shadows. Like this would be good. This one, this is great. Anything that's like this guy's okay as well. Anything very flat and simple. Even stuff like this is pushing it a little bit. And up at the top, you might notice there's one called wood texture. By including the word texture, that tends to filter out stuff that you don't want. And so textures are going to be your flat images. You're not going to get the picture of, the guy working in the wood shop, or all this, like this stuff. This is not going to show up in the wood texture. Man holding wooden stick while drilling hole. I don't think we need that. We're going to do wooden texture. So that'll get rid of most of the crap you don't want. There's still a couple ones that aren't very useful, like this guy and that one, but you can see the results we're getting are way, way better. Okay, so let's do... I'm going to try this one today. You guys are more than welcome to pick the same one I pick. You can find your own. Doesn't really matter. This one's also pretty good. Let's try this one out. So I'm going to click. Now this one actually looks pretty decent. My only critique about this, and I'm just going to nitpick a little bit. If I was using this in a professional project, my only slight concern would be down here we have a reflection transitioning from the bottom corner up here. You actually can see the reflection right there. So it's reflecting some type of window or something behind the camera. That probably shouldn't be in the texture because that reflection, we're going to get a reflection on the surface anyway in Maya just based on how the material works. So usually in the texture, you don't want to see a lot of shadow and reflection details. This should only be just the color. But I think because that's subtle enough, we can probably get away with doing it. So I'm just going to stick with this. Now up the top, I have a free download. It's a pretty good sized texture, so it's going to work out pretty well. We're just going to do a free download. And we can donate if we want to, but we're not going to worry about that right now. And let's get out of that. And you're more than welcome to try a couple different textures if you're not sure which one you like. And I'll do one more just to show you how easy it is to swap them out. So we're going to try this one as well. We're going to click. Original size is pretty good. That's a nice resolution. Free download. Again, we could donate, but thank you. Okay, so we got our textures. Now the first thing I want to do before I even connect anything, and this is very, very important, is remember how back in Shading and Lighting 1 you guys were using Maya projects, and I kept reiterating how you want to keep all your stuff organized in the project folders. This is that moment where it is very, very important that we do this properly, because as soon as you start getting into using textures, you have to remember your texture isn't really being brought in the scene. Textures aren't in the Maya file. Your Maya file will load textures, just like you load images in that Pixar Dome Light, but they're still being sourced externally. So if the project isn't set up properly and you start moving things around, it is so easy for those textures to lose their connection, and your project won't be able to find them, and things that used to have the wood texture will all of a sudden turn gray or black or white because they don't know where the texture is, and they start defaulting to these other colors because they can't figure it out. So how do we do this? We have just downloaded textures we want to use right here in the project folder. So we're going to check this out. We're going to hop in here. So remember, in our scenes folder, this is where the Maya file is. I'm going to go, in this case, into source images. This is where the cloud layers map is located. I'm going to make a new folder, because we're going to have a bunch of different materials in here eventually. The scene has quite a lot of stuff in it. And because we want to keep it organized, I think it's going to be a good idea to set up folders per material instead of us just having one source images folder with dozens of different textures in it, and then we're trying to figure out what's what. So this folder I'm going to call wood doors, I guess. Or, well, let's call it wood windows. Okay. And in here, I'm just going to drag these guys into it. You don't have to name these necessarily. I think it might be a good idea because it would kind of bother me. So I'm just going to click. We'll call this wood _ windows texture. And we'll do this one real quick as well. Wood windows texture 2. And we'll call this 1, I guess. Okay, so I have wood windows texture 1 and 2. They're just kind of hanging out. So how do we get this to work? Back in the scene, we're going to click on any object, because remember, we took the time to make sure that material's on everything. So it doesn't matter what piece you're clicking on. If that material's assigned to all the objects properly, you can click on any of them, and it's still going to show up in the attribute editor. Now what you want to do is right here where it has the color, instead of us using the color attribute, we're going to hit that button on the right side. We're going to click. You're going to see a new window pop up. So what this thing is that's popping up, this is Maya trying to figure out what do you want to connect into color. So as soon as you do this, you are stepping away from this color attribute. This is no longer going to work as soon as we pick our option in here. So again, we're going to click. A lot of things we can connect. We're going to pick the one we're going to use probably the most, which is a file. So this is going to load something externally. So we're going to click. And I do want you to see this back in the Hypershade. I want you to see what this looks like when you connect a file into it. So you know how before I was showing you this little material up here, you can click on it and like select and assign and all that. Right click and do graph network over the material. And this is what we've done. Whoops. Oh. What the heck? Let me try that again. I'm going to clear a graph. Let me do that one more time. It kind of freaked out. There we go. Okay. Had to regraph it. But this is the material. This guy is now connected into the material's diffuse color. That color, see how it's like not brown, it's grayed out because it's pulling its information from this thing. So it's kind of like Nuke where you can see how nodes connect together. Nuke is kind of top bottom, top down. This reads left to right. So we're going to click, hit the file folder. We're going to go to our Wood Windows folder, and we're going to pick the very first one. Open. Okay, it's loaded. Let's render it and see what it looks like. And I'll use a perspective camera so I can get kind of close. Brace yourself. Here's what it does. Turn on the render. Doesn't that look amazing? Don't panic. I know it has that RenderMan R. It will correct itself. Give it a moment and watch this bottom line right here. You'll see it click in just a second. It's going to change. Boom. You'll notice that something just kind of happened. It took a couple seconds for it to do it, like maybe 5-10 seconds. And then this little message just popped up. It says something about converted in about 15 seconds. And it's telling me there's a new thing located in the folder. So I want you to look at what happened in the project folder. Something changed. Remember, we didn't have 3 textures in here a second ago. We had 2 JPEGs. This just popped in there. So what happens is when you render with RenderMan, the file you're loading in isn't the format that RenderMan is going to use for the final render. So the first time you render a new texture, RenderMan is going to automatically convert your texture file from a JPEG to another format that RenderMan wants to use, which is called a .text format. So it's not JPEG, it's now .text. Now this is still here, you can still edit it, and it'll update, but this is the one it's really using in the render. There's a lot of reasons why it's important to use this one. You can see the file size is way bigger, but this is much, much better for memory use. And so in a bigger project, all these .text files do pay off, and it allows the render to run a lot more efficiently. It's just a little confusing because you've never seen this before. But just give it a second. It will eventually load in. You'll see it. Here's the wood on the door. It's really that easy. And if you want to modify this, by the way, you can still do it. So when this wood is here, if you click on something and start changing the settings, like let me turn off the selection highlighting one more time. If I bring down diffuse gain, just watch what it does to the texture. Let's do a crop too. So diffuse gain is darkening your texture file. You're just making it at either at full intensity, just like it is when you load it in, or half intensity, quarter intensity. You are now determining how bright you want the texture to look when it's in the render. Because once you see it with the light, you're going to just kind of determine it's not going to have the right intensity. So this is your control to affect that. How bright to dark do you want it? Okay, so we'll maybe keep it right around here for right now. And if you wanted to, you could also change the specularity. You could say, I want it to be a little shinier. Now, you do want to be careful with specularity because if you start cranking it up, it will get very glossy. So I would be a little cautious about doing too much work down here. But if you do want to like push a bit more of that kind of glossy wetness to it, you could boost this up a little bit. I'll actually keep it up just a little more than it defaults to because it's usually very, very dark. Now let's try swapping this thing out and trying a different texture just to see if we like it better. Okay, in the Hypershade, if you graph the material out, you could simply just click on the file and then hit the folder and load a new one in. But I do want to show you the way to get to the file node if you don't like using the attribute editor, or if you don't like using the Hypershade, sorry. Let me turn off the crop real quick so I can click on something. I know a lot of you are going to prefer to do everything by clicking on an object and just doing your work in the attribute editor. That's fine. If you want to use the attribute editor, when you click on an object, look to the right where you hit that little like checker button. If you hit this new input icon button that popped up, it will take you to the file node that's connected. So again, you just click on the object. Here's your color. Hit the button on the right. It will take you to the file node, and then from there, I can hit the folder, click on my other texture, load it in, and just again give it a second because it's going to have to convert that to a .text format. And in just a second, we should see it click over, and then we're going to see the other wood. There it is. And now we have a different wood texture on there that has a completely different look. It's like different saturation, different intensity. Now there are some like things about this which are not like 100% realistic. Like the images of the wood that we're picking, these are clearly photos of like a piece of wood that's maybe like a foot by a foot. We're putting it on a door that's probably about 10 feet tall. So you do want to be a little cautious because sometimes this wood grain pattern is going to look kind of dopey because it should not be that big on a massive door. But for just like teaching you guys how this works and from a distance, this will still look pretty believable and okay. But it's pretty much that easy. I can now go back. We can check it out on the full scene. And I should see it even on that window in the back. Yep, it's working. So we'll just do a crop over both those guys. So now I have the material assigned. I've got the texture loaded in. We swapped out the texture to test it out with like a different image. I even boosted up like the specularity just a little bit to give it a little more of like a shine, but it still looks pretty decent. Really the only thing that we didn't do is the telescope, and I'm gonna let you guys figure that out. It's kind of the same thing. You're just finding the wood pieces on the telescope, look in the groups, they're all named for you. Find the wood pieces, put your wood preset on it, find a texture, render it, make sure it looks good, tweak the material a little bit if you want, and then when you're through with that, for the metal, you guys get to pick and choose what type of metal you want to use. I know I'm not telling you which one to pick. You can just go through there, see what you like. And if you want to even like pick one of the presets, like let's say you pick, I don't know, brass, and then you want to like, push it to a warmer or maybe like a more green tone, you can still adjust those settings after if you want. So don't feel like you're locked into any of these. This is your starting point, but you do have freedom to go in there and adjust it. It all depends on what type of look you want to go for. And I don't think you're really going to know until you see the wood of the telescope next to it. And I think when you see the two side by side, you'll have a better idea of what you want to do with the metal. And then at the end of the day, after all that, you are balancing material properties. This is kind of just you playing around with settings. And then you are producing a final render that looks kind of like this. Make sure you do look at your render settings. Don't forget to like bump up max samples, your light samples, BXDF samples, indirect samples. And you're going to do your render just like you have before in the previous class. It might take, I don't know, 10 minutes to finish. Save it out. And you're turning in your Maya file and the image and your two textures that we talked about earlier into the activity. And that's 1.3. So it's not too bad. But if you guys have any questions, let me know. I have a bunch of videos where I go into a lot of detail on how this stuff works. I talk about UVs and I even do a bunch of stuff in Photoshop. So if you guys find a texture you like, but there are issues with it where there's like shadows and creases, weird, like a guy's hand is partially in the photo and you don't want the hand on the door. There are things I go over in these couple videos here at the front that will help you clean some simple things up so you can even use that in the final render. So definitely check out that playlist, even though we did cover quite a bit of it here in the lecture. All right. Do you guys have any questions about any of that? I think it'll make more sense once you jump in there and start playing around with the settings. But that's your first week. And the next week when we do our meeting, our live session, we're going to be getting into Photoshop, and I'm going to talk specifically about how we can use Photoshop to create a bunch of cool texture effects. All right. Well, if no one has any questions here, I think we'll call the meeting adjourned. I'll let you guys get back to it. Feel free to reach out to me on Discord if you have any concerns about it. And I should get a chance to check out everyone's 1.1 submission tomorrow. I haven't got to them yet, so just look out for your feedback tomorrow. And I'm sure if I don't talk to you before the weekend, I will see you all at the week 2 live session. Everybody have a good night.